Hey investors, Bradley here. I'm so excited to come at you with another podcast. And today we're going to talk about that struggle that's happening in our midst between landlords and tenants. It's been this big galactic war that's happening right now. And the question is, how much rent has been collected last month? And the next question is, in 2 weeks from now, we have our next payment coming out. How many people are going to make that payment? And I want to share with you today, what is the negative news and the bad news that's coming out of all of this and the challenges we're facing, but also the good news. And these come from our researching over the last couple weeks, various topics and various articles in order to wrap our head around the current scenario that we're having right now and whether people are working together or not. Now, if you want to jump onto our Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, we're putting that on any major social podcast platform. Check it out and leave us a rating if you're joining us on iTunes. And we're going to continue to put out fantastic content. I'm so excited to share with you today some of our findings. The first article I want to jump into comes from cbc.ca. The article's title, April 1st is rent day. Here's what you need to know if COVID-19 has you worried about paying. So the article reads, province has halted evictions, landlords given a 6-month deferral on mortgages. In Toronto, 47% of all residents are renters, and the average rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in the city is $22.40. That means a lot of people are on the hook to pay rent on Wednesday with little to no means to do it. So this article came out right before the payment was due this past month. Evictions have been halted in Ontario. This was an important thing as well, and I think many landlords and tenants are already aware of this, which is creating a bit of tension, has suspended all hearings for the duration of the outbreak, and that's happening at the Landlord and Tenant Board. So there's no hearings happening. However, Ford has been quick to say anyone who is able to pay their rent should, adding this doesn't give a free pass to people. Of course, but at the end of the day, side message to tenants, yes, there's been a deferral done for the landlords, but that is all it is. It is a deferral. Those payments will soon come due. And in some of our morning podcasts that we've run as well, we have found that that will cost on average at a 3% interest rate, $12,000 on top for the landlord having deferred. So deferral doesn't necessarily work in favor of the landlord. And so if you can work with your landlord, please do, because even though the gates are closed at this moment for evictions, it doesn't mean things aren't going to get a little bit more confusing later. A lot of tenants are getting confused and saying, hey, you know what? Landlord doesn't have to pay the mortgage. And in fact, the deferral is a loan that will end up costing landlord more money in the end. So it's essentially a deferral, meaning the interest is accumulating further, which means it's going to cost more. But we are seeing collective pushback from tenants. In fact, keepyourrent.com actually seems to be quite busy, and I'm hearing it from even outside of our industry, and maybe you've heard at it. Here's a video of them encouraging people not to pay their rent.
What does it look like to collectively strike? We as tenants share a common struggle. We've lost our jobs, our income, and yet rent is still due April 1st. While some people are able to work from home, many cannot. Some landlords, as well as entire countries like Italy and El Salvador, have rightfully taken note and suspended rent during this pandemic. But most of Toronto's landlords are still expecting rent as usual, when many of us cannot afford to pay at no fault of our own. We need to keep our money to spend on food, medicine, and for our loved ones. On April 1st, tenants from all across Toronto and beyond will come together and we will collectively keep our rent.
As you can see by just how much courage there is from the tenant side, don't be surprised if you see landlords turning around and doing everything within their power to try and gain some more control. But the irony is I find a lot of people are overly critical of landlords and not so critical of tenants. Yes, it's within your right to withhold rent. Should we be picketing and doing this? I don't know. But landlords are doing the same thing. In fact, out of the United States, there is an app called Neighborly app, which actually encourages landlords to report tenants who missed April rent. So they are tracking it in the States. And it's a self-titled landlords credit bureau. It's encouraging to report delinquent payments during the COVID-19 pandemic, according to a newsletter. And then they continue to deliver the most accurate and up-to-date tenant screening service in the market. So they are working on behalf of their clients. So let's not get all frustrated at landlords for using these things, but yet we're okay with tenants standing up for their rights. So everyone is trying to stand on their own side. And of course, this is creating a tension. But the $1 million question is how many people missed rent in April? And the answer is floating anywhere from 20 to 30%. Now, I get these numbers specifically from surveys done in the US and in BC. And I'm hearing nearby reports here in Ontario talking about closer to 30%. But those numbers, in theory, will continue to go up the longer that our economy continues to struggle. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There is good news. And I want to share with you a statement that comes from the Ontario Real Estate Association President, Sean Morrison. This email was sent out on March 31st, and it speaks directly to landlords, tenants, and the government. And I really like the way it's worded. So I'm going to share with you what he said. I want to take this opportunity to speak directly to Ontario landlords, tenants, and realtors. I also have advice for the government of Ontario. OREA is calling on all landlords to stop in-person showings of tenant-occupied properties or seeking another tenant during the state of emergency. Tenants with an underlying medical issue or who are otherwise at risk should never, in bold, be forced to allow strangers into their home during Ontario's state of emergency. I will mention briefly, I have seen listings that have come on that are still requiring showings even though there's tenants. So maybe not everybody is following this, but you do have strength tenants. Make sure you're bringing it up. The province of Ontario has an obligation to help the situation. Allowing tenants security in their homes during the crisis is the right thing to do. However, this should go hand in hand with ensuring landlords do not similarly suffer financial hardship, lose their investments, and exit the rental market altogether. Hopefully you guys are seeing there's a big circle. There are many players at play here. And so we got to really be careful where we step. Finally, Ontario realtors, that's us, need to continue to do what is right and act like the professionals they are. Suspend all face-to-face business in Ontario. That means no in-person showings of tenanted properties. Again, very strong words coming out of the president of OREA. And then it finishes off, to those who are not following our direction, you need to stop this and focus on the health and well-being of all Ontarians. As you know, realtors who ignore the direction of health officials during their trading activities will face serious sanctions, including possible disciplinary prosecution by RECO, which is the Real Estate Council of Ontario. Very strong words, and I'm so happy to see that come out. And we don't want any games, guys. This is a very serious time, but at the same time, there's a message there for landlords and for tenants. And hopefully you guys saw that article. If not, check it out, but I love the wording of that. But here is some further good news that I really, let's all pray collectively, see happen. The Ontario Federation of Labour is calling on the Ford government. Now, this article only came out a couple days ago, and we spoke more about it on our podcast in the morning, for further support for workers and their families and demanding rent relief in the form of the cancellation or abatement of rent, evictions, and utility payments. The OFL, which represents 54 unions and 1 million workers in Ontario, spoke out Tuesday morning ahead of the Ontario legislature's return to Queen's Park. This finally is good news for both landlords and tenants. Instead of creating this conflict in the way of landlords and tenants feuding in a crisis that was created by the government, it needs to be repaired by the government. By canceling these payments would be no different than any other abatements that's been giving out. In fact, we're seeing this happening in the commercial space. There's being assistance made. So it does not surprise me if maybe in the coming weeks, or at least in the coming months, we see something like this in the form of rent relief. And they were calling for up to $2,500 per month. This would be amazing news for landlords and tenants. It would remove the stress that we're seeing out there in this feud and really the complications of whether you should make your rent payment or not. But until that happens, we're going to continue to have some challenges. One of these challenges, which actually are going to benefit you tenants, is an influx of new Airbnb listings. In fact, we did a podcast. We talked about how do Toronto rent rates compare with the country a while back, and there's actually a video for that as well you can check out. We talked about how supply could increase by a potential 6,500 short-term rentals coming back in the market. And we're seeing this as well in recent articles. One published by Vice.com said, a McGill study published last year found that Airbnb likely removed 31,000 homes from the Canadian rental market, and that hosts are making $1.8 billion in 2018, a 40% jump from the previous year. So we've seen in the past an influx. Many of those same hosts can't fill a single unit now, and the coronavirus flushed them out. Here's why this is good news. 64% of the over 23,500 Airbnb listings in Toronto were for entire homes or apartments on March 16th. And they make a very good point here, which we've talked about in past videos. That means they're likely operating in violation of local bylaws. Short-term rentals here are only permitted in the host's principal residence. So people aren't even doing this legally. And so the quote that they have here is, even if the coronavirus only lasts 2 or 3 more months, with these new commitments, they won't be able to quickly get back on the short-term market rental, nor do I think they should. So the concept being, if you're struggling and you need to convert it into a long-term rental, and you lock into 1 year, especially in an area where we've seen growing rent rates, if that were to continue, which I don't see, which we're going to see in a moment, ultimately, this would be a good thing because we're going to have an influx. So they're actually going to shoot themselves in the foot by bringing them onto the long-term rental because this happens. It creates vacancy, which could climb in 2020 more so than we've predicted in past podcasts and videos. There's an article that comes out of the Toronto Star that says rent could drop 5% and vacancy rates could climb in Toronto this year. Vacancy rates on the condo side of the market could also climb to 3 to 4%, which is great because we've seen it at levels of 1 or 2% in Toronto. Absolutely crazy. And purchasing becomes a far more viable option in that environment than renting. But here, finally, we have a little bit of breathing room for tenants. The article also reads condo rents could decline by as much as 5% this year, retreating to 2018 levels. And that means $100 less than the current average of about $2,400 a month. There you go, $100 a month for you guys. Wonderful. And if the average is $2,400, then maybe that $2,500 a month cover that we would ask from the government would be a legitimate total. But here's one more thing. On that note, in their national rent report, Bullpen Research and Consulting and Rentals.ca found the average rent in Toronto dropped by 1.2% between February and March. Within a single month, and average rents for condo apartments declined 4.1% from $26.48 in 2019 till $25.39 in March 2020. Good news all around. Vacancies are increasing, which is giving a little bit of more breathing room. And it's also meaning finally a bit of a substantial decline in rents. We've seen moderate rent declines, very low, but now we're seeing significant declines in the way that actually helps tenants. And in my opinion, helps landlords too, but that's all in perspective. And so I want to cover as well a perspective from what I'm seeing out and about as I'm kind of entering the social medias. There was a blog TO article that read, Doug Ford just told tenants in Ontario they don't have to pay rent if they can't afford it. This became a very controversial issue, especially earlier on before the rents were supposed to be collected in April. And there was a comment made on that, which I like to bite my tongue, but on this one I just couldn't. And I want to share with you my thoughts on this comment. The top comment at that time was, so what about landlords like myself who can't afford to carry the rental property costs without rent? Our banks won't allow us to defer our mortgage on this because it's not our primary residence. Condo fees still need to be paid as well as insurance. My husband and I are both out of work due to COVID-19. Right now, we have zero income until the CERB kicks in. Of course, this was before that. And even in the best of times, we rely on the rental income to make ends meet. I've spoken with our tenant and I am willing to be flexible with rent payments. I get that many renters are in financial difficulty, but so are many landlords. Ford needs to make sure landlords are helped as well as tenants. That's why I love the support in the rent because that covers that side. But here's my thoughts on this. Okay, guys, as landlords, we need to be serious here. You are the business person. You're the one generating income from this. If you can't afford that unit, you should not be overextending yourself. And I think that this scenario is a perfect example of someone who has overextended themselves. Maybe they've got a little bit too excited about a market that is very good and very strong and has good fundamentals. But if you can't carry a few months, you shouldn't be doing that, or maybe sell one of your properties. Good luck doing that today. For every property we grow here at Watson Estates, we keep a cash reserve of $20,000. And we do that intentionally because you never know when you're going to have a rainy day. The burden is ultimately on the landlord. But of course, there is this feud happening between landlords and tenants. If you know somebody that's kind of caught in all of this or needs to know this information, make sure you send them this. Make sure you jump into our podcast, Toronto's #1 real estate podcast. And we're going to continue to put out fantastic content every morning. I'll see you guys next time. Take care and keep it real.